Looks like it's time for another amplifier video on the Uncle Doug channel. Greetings. Today's video will feature my homemade version of the 1960s Fender Vibro-Champ amplifier. As you can see in the front, I constructed a wooden grill that has design reminiscent of the old late 40s National amplifiers that I just love. I really like that old look. This is covered with a crocodile grained black naugahyde. The grill cloth is the same as what I've used on some of my other amps. It's a covering for deck chairs and chaise lounges, waterproof, extremely strong, just tough as nail stuff, and real affordable, and kind of neat colors. Okay, a nice design, gives you kind of almost like a houndstooth design. On this one, I did all the hardware in gold. The name tag, the Downsonic name tag, is in brass, and everything else I sprayed gold to go along with it. Got the typical Fender handle and the contrasting brown, not reptile naugahyde covering that I think comes up nicely in comparison with the black grill. The rear view is kind of typical of all my homemade amps, in which I have a large vent for the tubes and transformers to get some fresh air. And then I have a little small vent at the bottom that allows you to access the power cord and pull it out. This gives you as much area as possible of a back door to resonate with the speaker, to enhance your bass frequencies. Completely open back amplifier cabinets that just have nothing behind the speaker, in my opinion, suppress bass frequencies, and you lose a lot of that warmth that you expect from an old tube amp. The control panel has like an engine turned brass plate, toggle, pilot, and what's neat about the Vibro-Champ is, instead of a champ where you just have an on-off switch and a volume, and I mean it is absolutely bare bones, the Vibro-Champ gives you separate bass and treble, okay, a nice volume control of course, and then you've got a really nice tremolo with which you can control both the speed and intensity. There's a high and low gain input for your instruments. Okay, once again you see I did a finishing process on the metal that gives it sort of an antique gold look that goes with the control panel and all of the hardware. I tried to be consistent where it looks as nice as it sounds. As you can probably see, I made the back door in two pieces. There's the upper panel that covers the interior of the amplifier chassis. There's a seam here, and then there's the lower panel that covers the speaker and gives the resonant surface to it. I'll remove them both now. Okay, here we are with both back doors removed. Take the power cord out of the way. As you can see, it's the standard 3/4 inch pine construction of the cabinet with finger joints at each intersection. There's a few knots and all, but that 3/4 inch pine really gives you some great resonance. It's what the Fender Custom Shop uses on their amps, and I guess they should know. The speaker is a real dandy. As you can see, 220 makes it a Jensen, of course. It is from 1968 in the 8th month, so that would be August of 1968, which would be about right for this amplifier. It's a C12Q speaker. It is a vintage speaker that I took out of an old Ampeg speaker cabinet. It never saw the light of day, I don't think, till I removed it. As you can see, it looks absolutely new. And cone, everything are perfect. It is like a new speaker, but from 1968. Okay, here's the chassis. We got the 5Y3 rectifier separated from the rest of the tubes over here to cut down on hum. We got two 12AX7s. One is for the tremolo, one is the preamp, and then we've got the 6V6 output tube. The metal chassis itself is just made from a flat piece of sheet metal that I bent here in the workshop. I used 2x4s, vises, vice grips, teeth, anything that I could to bend this. As you all know, the big bends, like the one along the back here and above, are not that hard. It's these little ones where you're just sort of nibbling a small piece over that are really tough. But it all came out real nice. And I didn't have a spot welder, so I had to silver solder the sides in, which turned out real nice. They soldered in very nicely, and good and solid and strong. The output to the speaker, I've got my 8 ohm here and my 4 ohm here, so with the Jensen speaker I just plug into the 8 ohm output. If I wanted to run, say, two 12-inch 8 ohm speakers in parallel in a cabinet, I could plug into the 4 ohm output. So it gives some versatility. I don't like really hard wiring speakers in. I prefer this method where you have flexibility. And also when I'm hooking this up to say a dummy load to check it out on the oscilloscope, it's a whole lot easier just to unplug this and plug in the dummy load than it is to have to rewire everything and resolder it. The wiring is all point to point. I tried to be as neat as possible. I twisted all of the wires carrying alternating current to cut down on hum. I've got my foot switch jack back here for the tremolo, should I ever make or find a foot switch. All pretty neat and straightforward. The two inputs from the guitar, one is higher gain than the other. All of the potentiometers have this kind of a bus grounding wire to make sure that they're as quiet as possible. Got the old pilot light and the on-off switch. All in all, fairly simple and straightforward chassis design. I used the schematic from the AA764 Fender Vibro-Champ from the 60s with a couple upgrades here and there, but nothing really significant. It was pretty good just the way it was from the 60s. This is something I want to share with you that I think is a pretty good idea. Say you're using an output transformer that has some wires or connections that you're not going to use. I know people say just tape them off and let them flop around in the chassis and hope to God that the tape stays on them so you don't end up with a dead short. Instead, what I do is I wire them to unused terminals on a terminal strip. Okay, this red wire is the 8K ohm input for the output transformer. I used the 5K input, which I thought was best for a single 6V6. If you feel different, then you could use the 8K ohm input and wire the 5K here to this unused lug. But here it's absolutely secure. Also, the gray wire down here is the 16 ohm output. Say someday I need a 16 ohm output capability. Well, there's the wire to do it. Okay, so here they are. They're safe, they're secure, and I've labeled to tell exactly what they are. You know as well as I do, if you've made one of these a year later, you open it up, you see these two wires flopping around in there, and you wonder what the heck are those? If your memory's like mine, it helps if you leave yourself a little note. One other thing to notice is back here I soldered a steel lug to the chassis and use that as a star ground, which is one common place where as many grounds as possible all lead. Okay, so it cuts down on ground loops if everything is grounded in the same place. Okay, one last comment before I button this up, and that is this was not a kit. No two pieces of this ever really came from the same place. This was a bunch of parts that I had on hand, some sheet metal I had laying around, some parts I ordered, like the knobs and whatever capacitors I didn't have, the speaker I found, the tubes I have on a large collection of old vintage tubes, used tubes that I use in my amplifiers. So this was just absolutely scratch built, but using a schematic from a Fender Vibro-Champ. Okay, let's take a look at the schematic of the Vibro-Champ. First is Fender's rather clever input circuit. When you look at this, it's sort of confusing, but let's see if we can't figure it out. If I plug into number 2, I'm going to lift the contact off of the ground. When I do, the only way for the signal to get to the grid is through 68K of resistance. But if I plug into 1, I lift off of this ground, but I still have 2 routes to get to the grid. One through this 68K and one through this 68K. So this is 34K of impedance to get to the grid. If I plug into 1, my gain will be much greater than if I plug into 2. Another thing that's interesting here, well, first off, is fairly standard, and that is the 12AX7 that's used as a preamp is split in half, and the tone controls and the volume control are both placed in between the 2 halves of that 12AX7 preamp. That's standard on almost every Fender amp. The tremolo, though, is sort of interesting. We come down here, we're going to split the 12AX7. We're going to set up an oscillation using the 0.02, 0.01, and 0.01 microfarad capacitors in this circuit. Now, those 3 capacitors at right angles to each other are going to set up an oscillation in this 12AX7 tube. And let's see how the amplifier is going to use it. First off, we're going to leave the cathode and come down here. We're going to adjust our intensity by sending varying amounts of the signal from the cathode either to ground or up to the cathode of the preamp tube. And that's how we're going to get our tremolo, by varying the cathode bias in the second half of the 12AX7. Now the signal then from that second half of the preamp 12AX7 will be sent to the 6V6. It'll either be varying in its volume due to the tremolo effect of the bottom 12AX7, or it will be going in directly without any tremolo interference. Feeds into the grid of the 6V6 and then to the output transformer. In my case, I used a special output transformer I got from Triode Electronics. It had 2 separate impedances on the input and 3 separate impedances on the output. I like that because it gives me flexibility. You may choose to go with the less expensive and simpler output transformer, and I'm sure it'll work just great. One last point of some significance, I think, is that if you look down here, the 6-volt winding on this power transformer has no center tap. You want to have a center tap on your 6-volt winding so that you can ground it to cut down on the hum. If you don't have the center tap, we can create what is called a virtual center tap by connecting a 100 ohm resistor to each of these leads and then grounding the other end of the resistor. So we have 100 ohms to ground, 100 ohms to ground. It will cut down the hum, and for all intents and purposes, it's as if you did have a center tapped filament winding on your transformer. Probably the easiest way to accomplish this is where your 2 6-volt leads connect to your pilot lamp. Use those lugs and solder a 100 ohm resistor to ground to each of the lugs, and you will have your artificial center tap, and it will greatly reduce the hum in your amplifier. For those of you who are scratch building amplifiers using classic old circuits like this, Let me give you a little hint, something I found out through experience. You can look up the schematic on the internet, and that's easy. In this case, a AA764 schematic for the Fender Vibro-Champ amp. What that says is this is the first version of the schematic that was designed in the 7th month of July of 1964. Before you just duplicate this, look to see if there aren't some upgraded, improved forms of the circuit. In other words, the Fender engineers heard complaints probably from the first schematic that I showed you, and those complaints probably centered around this. The capacitance of the first filter capacitor is 20 microfarads, 40 would be better, and the wattage of the cathode bias resistor on the 6v6 is being overcome by heat. So here's what they did. They made a revised schematic in which they make the first filter capacitor 40 microfarads, and they make the bias resistor 2 watts instead of 1. So here's what you do. You save yourself a lot of grief. Instead of repeating old mistakes, start off with the revised schematic and incorporate those changes that were determined to be very favorable for this circuit. And then you're going to end up with basically the classic Vibro-Champ circuit, but with the upgrades that will make it a longer lasting and better performing circuit. Here we go with the tremolo intensity and speed both at 5. Now let's try it without the tremolo and the volume, bass, and treble all set at 5. Well, the clock on the wall says it's time to bid farewell to today's video featuring my homemade Fender Vibro-Champ amplifier. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and that you'll join me again in the near future for other videos featuring vintage and homemade amplifiers and effects. I really appreciate your time and interest, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.